There is one law older than every border in the galaxy, older than the trade lanes, older than the treaties, older than most of the languages still spoken in the dark. Empires have risen and fallen without ever agreeing on a single thing, not on gods, not on currency, not on where one species' claim ended and another's began. They fought over all of it. They bled over all of it. But on one matter, every voice in the Reach fell silent and nodded. Never wake the sleepers of Ethon. It was not written into law the way other laws are written, debated by committees and stamped with seals. It was passed down the way you pass down a warning about deep water to a child who cannot yet swim. You did not need to understand it to obey it. You only needed to hear the tone and the voice of the one who told you, and you understood that this was not a rule you tested. I am one of the Sethran. We keep records. We have kept them since before your species learned to keep anything at all. We are not a people who forget, and that is not always the gift it sounds like. To remember everything is to be unable to look away from anything. And so I will tell you plainly, because lying serves nothing now. My people did not merely obey the rule. My people wrote it. We carved it into the first archive. We taught it to the young species as they climbed up out of their own gravity wells, blinking, ambitious, certain they were the first to ever be clever. We let them believe the rule existed to keep a monster contained. We let them believe that somewhere in the threshold reach there slept a weapon so terrible that the galaxy had agreed just once to leave a door closed. That was a kindness. It was also a lie, and I am too old now to keep telling it. Because the rule has been broken. It was broken 11 days ago, and the thing we were all so careful never to wake is awake. There is a particular kind of fear that does not arrive with sound. It does not announce itself. It settles into a room the way cold settles into a body slowly from the edges inward, until you realize you have been afraid for some time without knowing when it began. That is the fear I have lived in for 11 days. That is the fear I am going to hand to you now, because it should not be carried by one species alone. To understand what we did, you have to understand what we were afraid of. And to understand that, you have to understand that the rule was never about protecting the galaxy from humanity. It was about protecting the galaxy from what humanity would do if we ever made them wake up. We knew that was the unbearable part. From the very beginning, we knew exactly what we had put to sleep, and exactly why it had agreed to sleep, and exactly what would happen if anyone was foolish enough or greedy enough to open the door. We knew, and we built the rule anyway, and we told the lie anyway, because the truth was a weight none of us wanted to hold. So let me hold it now, in front of all of you. History has a way of turning things over in your hands until you no longer recognize what you are holding. The thing we called a tomb was never a tomb. The thing we called a containment was never a prison. And the species we taught our children to fear had done nothing, nothing at all to earn that fear, except the one thing none of us could forgive them for. They had been merciful to us, once, when they had every reason not to be. And we could not live in a galaxy that knew it. Part 2. The threshold reach is not a place anyone goes on purpose. It sits at the ragged edge of the old expansion routes, where the charts stop being charts and start being warnings. The star there died a long time ago, collapsed, slewed off its outer shells, and left behind a slow gray storm of debris and frozen gas that no instrument loves to look at for long. Navigation is poor. Salvage is poorer. There is nothing there worth the fuel it takes to arrive. That was the point. We chose it precisely because it offered nothing. A vault is only as safe as it is boring, and the Reach was the most boring place we could find that still held together. For 900 years, the galaxy looked at that dead star and felt the specific, useful disappointment that keeps the curious away. Good, we thought. Let them be bored. Let them go somewhere shinier. Inside the debris field, unmarked, unlit, running cold so that even its own heat would not betray it, drifted the cradle of Ethon. It was not beautiful. We did not build it to be looked at. It was a long, blunt shape, the color of nothing, roughly the size of a small moon's broken-off piece, and it did exactly one thing well. It stayed closed. Everything about it, the hull, the dampening, the slow tumbling drift that mimicked ordinary wreckage, was designed around that single function. A locked door pretending to be a rock. Inside the cradle slept 40,000 human beings. I want you to sit with that number because it is going to matter later and not in the way you expect. 40,000. To us, at the time, it sounded like an army, a terrifying figure, enough surely to justify every precaution we took. We told ourselves we had locked away a host, a legion, a buried war. We had not. We will come back to that. For 900 years, the cradle did the only thing it was built to do, and it did it perfectly. It stayed shut. The humans slept the deep sleep, the kind where the body forgets it is a body, where the years pass without leaving fingerprints. They did not age. They did not dream that we could measure. They simply waited in the dark and the cold in numbers that we had convinced ourselves to fear. And one of them did not sleep. There was always meant to be one awake. A single human, rotated across the long centuries, kept conscious to watch the systems and tend the sleepers and, if the worst ever came, to speak. They called this one the steward. It was not a position of power. It was a position of loneliness so total that I do not have a word for it in my own language, and my language has a great many words for being alone. When the seal finally broke, the steward who opened her eyes was named Naomi Castellanos. She had been awake, alone, for 200 years. We agreed never to look too closely at the cradle. That was part of the rule, the unspoken part. Not only do not wake them, do not study them, do not approach them, do not ask why they sleep. We told the galaxy this was for safety. The truth is that we could not bear to be reminded. As long as the door stayed shut, we could pretend the thing behind it was a monster. The moment anyone opened it, we would have to remember it was not. So the galaxy agreed not to remember, and for 900 years that worked. It worked right up until a salvage fleet looked at a dead star, saw a buried shape too regular to be natural, and decided that whatever the Sethran had worked so hard to hide must be worth a great deal of money. Part 3. Admiral Carl Vasseth of the Dreven Reclamation was not an ideologue. I want to be fair to him, even now, because it would be easy to make him a villain, and the truth is more useful than that. He did not break the oldest law in the galaxy out of hatred or ambition or some grand design. He broke it because he was a salvager, and salvagers do not believe in haunted houses. They believe in cargo. The Dreven made their living pulling value out of places other people were too superstitious to enter. They had a saying, which loses something in translation but means roughly, a curse is just a profit nobody had the nerve to collect. Vasseth had collected a great many profits that way. He had grown rich on other people's fear. So when his survey drones drifted through the threshold reach on a fuel-saving shortcut and pinged a buried structure too symmetrical to be debris, he did not feel dread. He felt lucky. His analysts told him what every analyst would have told him. An object that size, hidden that carefully in a place that worthless, could only be one thing: a cache. The Sethran were old and rich and secretive. An old, rich, secretive species do not hide rocks. They hide weapons. They hide the dangerous, expensive, profitable things they do not want anyone else to have. Vasseth looked at the cradle and saw a buried armory. He brought his fleet in close, 11 ships. He began to scan. That was when his crews found the first marking. The outer hull of the cradle was not entirely blank. We had allowed the humans one concession against our better judgment. They were permitted to mark their own vault. And across the breaching points, in a script no Dreven could read, the humans had stamped a single word over and over, thousands of times. Vasseth's linguists fed it to their systems and waited for a translation, expecting a manufacturer's stamp, a serial code, a warning. The word was volunteer. The translation system struggled. This is recorded, I have the logs. The Dreven language, like most languages in the Reach, has many words for service. It has words for the conscript, the one compelled to serve. Words for the slave, the one owned into service. Words for the hireling, the one paid. Words for the prisoner, the hostage, the sacrifice chosen by others. What it does not have, what almost no language in the galaxy has, is a word for one who chooses, freely, with nothing forcing them, to take on the suffering of others. The systems returned their best guess. Conscript. Vassith read it and nodded. Of course. Soldiers, then, stored soldiers. A buried army sealed away. This only confirmed his belief that he had found a weapons cache, and a weapons cache full of soldiers is worth even more than one full of guns. He gave the order to breach. I have listened to the recording of that order more times than is good for me. There is nothing dramatic in it. He does not gloat. He does not hesitate. He simply tells his engineers to cut the seal, the way a man tells a servant to open a window. The oldest law in the galaxy, the one law every species agreed upon, the one door 900 years of careful silence had kept shut, and it ended with a bored admiral saying, more or less, "Get it open. I haven't got all cycle." The seal was not designed to resist cutting forever. It was designed to resist casual cutting, to turn away anyone who was not deeply committed to getting inside. Vassith was deeply committed. His engineers were good. It took them 19 hours. And on the far side of that seal, in a small warm room that had not changed in 2 centuries, an old human woman watched a light on her console turn from blue to red. She had been told what that light meant by a steward who came before her, who had been told by a steward before that, in an unbroken chain reaching back 900 years to the first human who agreed to stay awake. Red meant the door was being opened from the outside. Naomi Castellanos sat very still for a moment. Then she stood, and she straightened her clothing the way a person does before answering a knock, and she went to meet the people who were about to make the worst mistake in the history of the galaxy. Part 4. When the Dreven boarding teams came through the breach, they expected a tomb. Cold corridors, rows of frozen soldiers, crates of buried weapons waiting to be inventoried and sold. What they found instead was a single unarmed woman, 200 years awake and utterly unsurprised to see them, standing in a doorway with her hands open at her sides. She spoke to them in their own language. This unsettled them more than any weapon could have. The steward's task across the centuries was, in part, to learn the tongues of the galaxy as they changed, so that whoever finally came would be met with words rather than silence. Naomi Castellanos had spent decades of her long watch studying languages she might never get to use. When she greeted the Dreven in fluent, careful Dreven, the boarding party stopped where they stood. "You shouldn't have opened it," she said, "not as a threat, as a kindness, as a person warning a stranger away from a ledge." Vassith, when they brought him across, did not hear a warning. He heard a bluff. He had spent his life among people who said you'll regret this when they had no power to make anyone regret anything. He looked at the empty corridors, at the 40,000 sleeping bodies in their cold rows, at the one old woman with open hands, and he relaxed. Whatever he had feared, this was not it. This was a graveyard with a caretaker. So he began to strip it. This is the part of the record I find hardest to read, because it is where the Dreven's confidence curdled into something I recognize. They went through the cradle the way they went through every wreck, efficiently, thoroughly, without reverence. They cut open storage. They cataloged the sleepers as inventory, and everywhere they went they found that word again, stamped and etched and woven into everything. Volunteer, on the walls of the sleep chambers, on the personal effects. On a plaque at the center of the vault that listed, in human script, 40,000 names. The Dreven linguists kept working at it because it was clearly important and they could not stand not knowing. Their second attempt at translation was worse than the first. Having decided these were soldiers, and having found a word they could not parse attached to every single one, the systems reached for context and produced a new guess. The tricked. The ones who were fooled into service. Vassith liked this even better. It fit his picture of the galaxy, in which everyone is either clever enough to trick others or foolish enough to be tricked, and there is no third kind of person. 40,000 fools, sleeping where someone had lied them into sleeping. He could work with fools. Naomi did not correct him. She let him keep his story. The way you let a child keep believing a comforting thing for one more night, because she understood something Vasith did not. She understood that he was about to learn the truth himself, and that nothing she said would prepare him for it half so well as the learning. So instead of arguing, she explained, quietly, patiently, not what humanity was capable of. She never once threatened him, but what humanity was. And this, I have come to believe, was more frightening than any threat could have been, because a threat tells you what someone might do, and an explanation tells you what they already are. She told him the 40,000 were not an army. I told you that number would matter. Vasith had assumed 40,000 was a host, a force, a buried legion. Naomi told him the truth. 40,000 was a seed. It was not the strength of humanity. It was a sample of it, a cutting taken from a living thing, preserved so that the living thing could not be entirely lost. Behind these 40,000, she said, there had once been numbers he did not have words large enough to fear, scattered across more worlds than the Dreven had ever charted, and what slept here was not the whole of that, it was the small part. The part that had been left behind on purpose. Left behind by what? Vasith asked. And here Naomi Castellano smiled, for the first and only time in the entire record, and she said something that his linguists struggled to translate almost as badly as they had struggled with that one stubborn word. By the rest of us, she said, who chose to go quietly so that you would never have to find out what we'd have done if we'd stayed. Part 5. Now we come to the moment the whole galaxy was watching, though most of it did not yet know it was watching. Word travels strangely in the Reach. By the time Vasith had been inside the cradle for 6 days, the news had leaked out along the salvage networks and into the trade lanes, and from there to us, the Sethran, who heard it the way you hear that a fire has started in a building you swore would never burn. The cradle was open. A Dreven admiral was inside it. The sleepers were being inventoried for sale. The rule was broken, and every species old enough to remember why the rule existed went very, very still. Because we all knew what came next. We had spent 900 years not thinking about it precisely so that we would never have to know what we knew. When you wake 40,000 human beings into a vault that has been cut open by people who came to sell them, there is only one thing that has ever happened in our oldest and most carefully buried records. There is only one ending. The humans wake up, and they understand what was done to them, and they answer it. Naomi Castellanos had the power to begin that answer. This is not speculation. The systems were hers to command. With the seal broken and the sleepers stirring and a hostile fleet docked against an open vault, every protection the cradle had ever held in reserve was hers to release. She could have vented the boarding parties into the dark. She could have turned the cradle's own drift into a weapon and folded the Dreven fleet into the debris field forever. She could have woken the 40,000 not gently, as planned, but all at once and angry, and let the Reach become exactly the graveyard the Dreven had mistaken it for. The galaxy expected her to. We expected her to. I will be honest because honesty is all I have left to offer. We expected it because, in her place, every one of us would have done it and called it justice. She gathered the Dreven together. All of them, Vasith at the front, in the great central chamber beneath the plaque with the 40,000 names. She told them, plainly, what she could do. She laid it out the way you would explain a machine to someone who was about to operate it. Here is the lever, here is what it does, here is how little it would cost me to pull it. She made absolutely certain that Call Vasith understood he was, at that moment, the most powerless living thing in the galaxy, and that his life and the lives of his entire fleet rested in the open hands of one tired old woman whose people he had come to sell. And then she told him she was going to wake the sleepers. Vasith braced for the end. The recording captures it, the way the Dreven drew together, the way some of them began, at last, to understand the words stamped on every wall around them. Volunteer. The ones who chose. They were standing in a room built by people who had chosen freely to do something, and only now, far too late, did it occur to the Dreven to wonder what these people had chosen to do. Let that settle for a moment. An admiral who had spent his whole life certain that the galaxy was divided into the clever and the foolish, standing in a chamber that proved there was a third kind of person all along, and realizing he had spent 6 days calling that third kind fools because his language had no other word for them. Naomi woke the sleepers. 40,000 human beings opened their eyes across 2 centuries of darkness. The cradle filled with the sound of breathing, of movement, of a people returning to themselves. And the Dreven, surrounded, outnumbered, at the absolute mercy of a species they had wronged in the deepest way one people can wrong another, were let go. All of them, every ship, every salvager, Vaseth himself. Naomi opened the broken seal the rest of the way, by choice this time, and she told them to leave and to carry what they had seen back into the galaxy and to tell it true. No one was harmed. No one was vented into the dark. The lever she had shown him so carefully, she did not touch. That was the moment, not a weapon, a choice. The single most powerful thing any of us had ever witnessed, and it was the decision not to act, made by the one people in the galaxy who had every right to. Part 6. You have been waiting, I think, for the twist, for the reveal that the mercy was a trick, that the restraint was a trap, that the humans let the Dreven go in order to do something crueler later. I understand why you wait for it. I waited for it too. We all did. 900 years of telling ourselves they were monsters had left us unable to imagine that the mercy was simply the mercy, all the way down, with nothing hidden underneath. But I promised you the truth, and here it is. Here is why the rule existed. Here is the thing my people could not bear to remember. The Dreven were not the first to wrong humanity. We were. 900 years ago, when humanity first came up out of their own small corner of the dark, the galaxy did to them what the galaxy does to anything young and growing and inconveniently capable. We feared them, and we moved against them, and I will not soften it. The Sethran were not bystanders in that. We were among the worst of it. We did terrible things to a young species for the crime of being more than we wanted them to be. And we did those things believing, as Vaseth believed, that we were the clever ones and they were the fools. We were wrong about which kind of person they were too. When humanity finally had us, and they did have us completely the way Naomi had the Dreven, the lever in their open hands and every right in the galaxy to pull it, they did not pull it. They looked at the species that had wronged them, the whole frightened, cruel lot of us, and they chose to let us live. Not out of weakness. They had no weakness left to blame it on. They chose it freely, with nothing forcing them. They volunteered. And we could not survive it. That is the thing none of us could say aloud for 900 years. It was not their strength that we could not live beside. We could have made peace with strength. Strength is a thing you understand, a thing you can fear cleanly and respect. What we could not live beside was being forgiven by the people we had wronged. Every day in a galaxy that contained them would have been a day spent knowing that they had held our worst selves in their open hands and chosen mercy, and that we had never once, in all our long history, been capable of the same. Their forgiveness was a mirror, and we could not stop seeing ourselves in it. So humanity did one last thing for us, and it was the cruelest kindness in the history of the Reach. They saw that we could not bear them, and rather than make us bear them, they left. Most of them went out into the dark, beyond our charts, beyond our reach, to spare us the weight of their presence. And a small part of them, 40,000, a seed, a cutting, chose to lie down and sleep here at the edge of a dead star, so that if the galaxy ever grew up enough to deserve them, there would be something left to wake. They volunteered for that too. Every name on that plaque chose the dark, so that we would not have to live in their light until we were ready. And we, the Sethran, who had been forgiven by them, we built a law to make sure no one ever woke them, and we told the galaxy it was to keep a monster contained. We let our children fear the kindest thing that ever happened to us, because the truth was a debt we did not know how to repay. Carl Vassith broke that law 11 days ago. He did not destroy anything. He revealed something. He pulled open a door we had spent 9 centuries leaning against, and on the other side of it was not a weapon and not a monster but a mirror, and now the whole galaxy is looking into it, and we cannot make them look away. The 40,000 are awake. Naomi Castellanos walks among a people returning to themselves, and they are not arming. They are not gathering for war. They are doing the one thing we feared more than any weapon. They are deciding, freely, with nothing forcing them, what they want to do with a galaxy that buried them and called it safety. I do not know what they will choose. That is the terror and the hope of it both, that, for the first time in 900 years, the choice is theirs, and we have no idea what mercy looks like when it is fully awake. I am Sethrin. We keep records, and I am closing this one with the only true thing I have left to say. There was one law older than every empire in the galaxy, and we wrote it, and it was a lie, and it is broken now. We told you to never wake humanity because we said they were a weapon we had locked away. The truth is simpler and worse, and I should have said it 900 years ago. We never feared what they would do to us if they woke. We feared what they would forgive. Some species you do not get to put down twice.